My name is Marcus. I'm 27 years old, and I live in a modest two-story house in Springfield, Missouri, with my parents, David and Susan, and my younger brother, Tyler. For the past 6 years, ever since I graduated college, I've been the financial backbone of this household. I work 2 jobs, days at a warehouse loading trucks, and evenings delivering food for various apps. It's exhausting work that leaves me drained, but between both jobs, I manage to bring in enough to keep our family afloat. The bills never stop coming. Mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, car insurance, Tyler's phone bill, mom's medications. It all adds up to a mountain of expenses that somehow always lands on my shoulders. My parents are both in their early 50s, but they've convinced themselves they're too worn out to work. Dad, David, spends his days watching sports highlights and scrolling through Facebook, occasionally doing odd jobs for neighbors that pay maybe $50 here and there. Mom, Susan, fills her time with cooking shows, online shopping for things we can't afford, and long phone calls with her sisters complaining about everything from the weather to politics. Then there's Tyler, my 24-year-old brother, who's been the golden child since birth. In my parents' eyes, Tyler can do no wrong. He's finding himself, they say. He's exploring his options. He's been exploring those options for 3 years now, since dropping out of community college, living rent-free while I work myself into the ground. They've never once suggested he get a job, not even part-time. According to them, Tyler is too creative for regular work and needs time to pursue his dreams. I've never complained, at least not out loud. Family is family, right? I tell myself that every morning when my alarm goes off at 5:30 a.m. and every night when I collapse into bed after 14 hours of work. But deep down, the resentment has been building like pressure in a kettle. Everything changed on a sweltering Tuesday in July. I had just finished a particularly brutal day, 8 hours of loading 100-pound packages in 95-degree heat, followed by 6 hours of delivering food to people who barely tipped. My back was killing me, my shirt was soaked in sweat, and all I wanted was a cold shower and maybe an hour of mindless TV before passing out. I walked through the front door to find Tyler pacing around the living room with an energy I hadn't seen from him in years. His eyes were bright, his hands were gesturing wildly, and he had that manic excitement that usually preceded one of his brilliant ideas. "Marcus," he shouted the moment he saw me. "Perfect timing, man. I need to tell you something incredible." Mom and Dad were sitting on the couch, leaning forward with the kind of attention they'd never given to any of my work stories or exhaustion. They looked at Tyler like he was about to announce he'd won the lottery. "What's going on?" I asked, dropping my work bag by the door and hoping this wouldn't take long. Tyler grinned so wide I thought his face might split. "I'm starting a business, bro. A real business. This is it. This is my chance to make something of myself." I felt that familiar sinking feeling in my stomach. Tyler's business ideas were legendary in our house. There was the time he wanted to start a dog walking service, but never actually walked any dogs. The failed attempt at selling handmade jewelry that resulted in a garage full of unused beads. The brief period where he was convinced he could make millions dropshipping products from China, which ended when he realized he'd actually have to do work. "What kind of business?" I asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. "Food trucks," Tyler said, his voice full of conviction. But not just any food truck. Gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches with artisanal ingredients. Think about it. Everyone loves grilled cheese, but nobody's doing it right. I'm going to revolutionize comfort food. Mom clapped her hands together like Tyler had just announced he was curing cancer. "Isn't that wonderful, Marcus? Your brother is finally going to be an entrepreneur." Dad nodded enthusiastically. The boy's got vision. Real vision. This could be the start of a whole empire. I looked at Tyler, who was practically vibrating with excitement, and tried to imagine him running any kind of business. The same Tyler who couldn't be bothered to keep his own room clean or remember to do his own laundry. The Tyler who had quit his last part-time job at a coffee shop because he said the manager was crushing his creative spirit by asking him to show up on time. "That sounds interesting," I said carefully. "How much startup capital are you looking at?" Tyler's grin faltered slightly. "Well, that's the thing. I've done all the research, right? I know exactly what kind of truck I need, what equipment, what permits. I've got the whole business plan figured out." "How much, Tyler?" $35,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step back. $35,000? Tyler, I know it sounds like a lot, he said quickly, but think about the return on investment. Food trucks can make incredible money, especially with the right concept. I could be pulling in 6 figures within the first year. I looked around the room. Mom and Dad were nodding along as if this all made perfect sense. As if Tyler, who had never successfully completed any project in his entire life, was suddenly going to become a successful business owner. "Where are you planning to get $35,000? I asked. That's when all 3 of them looked at me with expectant faces. The same faces they made every month when the bills came due. The same faces they made when the car needed repairs or the roof started leaking. Well, Mom said slowly, we were hoping you might be able to help. I actually laughed. Not a happy laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even me. Help, Mom? I don't have $35,000. I don't have $3,500. Every penny I make goes into keeping this house running. Dad frowned like I had insulted him personally. Come on, Marcus. You're always working. You must have something saved up, and this is for your brother's future. My future? I repeated. What about my future? I work 70 hours a week just to keep the lights on. When do I get to pursue my dreams? Tyler looked hurt, which somehow made me even angrier. I thought you'd be supportive, man. I thought you'd want to see me succeed. I do want to see you succeed, I said, feeling my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. But success means actually working for something. It means starting small, learning the business, proving yourself. It doesn't mean asking your brother to hand you $35,000 for a fantasy. The room went quiet. Mom's face had that pinched look she got when she thought I was being difficult. Dad crossed his arms and shook his head like I was the most unreasonable person in the world. You know what your problem is, Marcus? Mom said, her voice cold. You're jealous. You're jealous that Tyler has ambition and creativity, and all you know how to do is work dead-end jobs. That word, jealous, hit me harder than any physical blow could have. Me, jealous? I was the one who had sacrificed everything for this family. I was the one who worked 2 jobs while Tyler slept until noon. I was the one who paid for their groceries, their utilities, their Netflix subscriptions, their everything. I'm not jealous, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm realistic, and I'm tired of being the only adult in this house. I turned and walked toward the stairs, but Tyler called after me. Think about it, okay? Just think about it. This could change everything for our whole family. I didn't answer. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed, staring at the wall. Outside, I could hear them talking in hushed voices, no doubt discussing what a selfish person I was and how disappointed they were in my attitude. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. It started with little comments, Mom mentioning how proud she was of Tyler's initiative and how she hoped his own brother would support him. Dad making jokes about how some people were dream crushers while others were dream builders. Tyler himself tried a different approach, cornering me in the kitchen one morning to explain his business plan in excruciating detail, complete with projected profit margins and customer demographics. I held firm. I didn't have $35,000, and even if I did, I wouldn't hand it over for what seemed like an expensive way for Tyler to avoid getting a real job. But then, Dad came home one evening with news that made my blood run cold. Good news, he announced, settling into his recliner with a satisfied grin. I talked to my buddy Rick, you know, Rick from the old neighborhood, and he's willing to lend us the money for Tyler's business. Mom gasped with delight. Oh, David, that's wonderful. How much? $20,000. He says Tyler can pay him back once the business gets going. I felt a familiar dread settling in my chest. What are the terms of this loan? Dad waved his hand dismissively. Details? Details. The important thing is Tyler gets his shot. Dad, what are the terms? His smile faded slightly. Well, Rick wants it paid back within a year, with interest. But that's fine. Tyler's business will be making money by then. And if it doesn't? The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Dad's face darkened. Why are you always so negative, Marcus? Why can't you have faith in your brother? Because I knew Tyler. Because I knew that in 6 months, when the initial excitement wore off and the actual work began, he'd lose interest, just like he always did. And when Rick came looking for his $20,000 plus interest, guess who would be expected to pay it back? But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and went back to my room, feeling like I was watching a slow-motion car crash that I was powerless to prevent. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Dad and Rick worked out the loan details. Tyler spent hours online, researching food trucks and equipment, making lists, and drawing up plans. Mom started telling everyone she knew about her son's new business venture, practically glowing with pride whenever she talked about it. I kept working my 2 jobs, coming home exhausted to a house full of excitement and planning that I wasn't part of. They'd look up when I walked in, and their conversations would pause for a moment, like they were waiting for me to finally come to my senses and offer to contribute. When I didn't, they'd exchange glances and continue without me. About 3 weeks into this circus, Tyler made an announcement that shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow still did. I found the perfect truck, he said over dinner, his eyes shining with excitement. It's a 2015 Chevy with all the equipment already installed. The guy's asking $30,000, but I talked him down to $28,000. That's wonderful, honey, Mom said, beaming at him. When can you buy it? Well, that's the thing. Rick's $20,000 covers most of it, but I need another $8,000 for the truck, plus money for permits, initial inventory, insurance. I'm looking at about $15,000 more. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically feel their eyes turning toward me, but I kept eating my spaghetti and pretended not to notice. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. Marcus, this is your chance to really help your brother. This is a real opportunity. I put down my fork and looked at all three of them. I don't have $15,000. But you must have something saved, Mom insisted. You work so much and you live here rent-free. Rent-free? I nearly choked. I pay the mortgage, Mom. I pay the utilities, the insurance, the groceries. What exactly do you think rent-free means? Tyler leaned forward, his voice taking on that pleading tone he'd perfected over the years. Come on, Marcus. I know you've got money stashed away somewhere. You're always so careful with your spending. Just help me get started, and I'll pay you back as soon as the business takes off. I stared at my younger brother, this man who had never held a job for more than 3 months, who had never paid a bill or taken responsibility for anything in his entire adult life, and felt something inside me finally snap. No, I said quietly. No? Dad's voice was sharp with disbelief. No, I won't give you money for this. Tyler, you want to start a business? Get a job first. Any job. Work for 6 months. Save some money. Learn what it means to actually work for something. Then we can talk. The explosion was immediate and brutal. Dad started yelling about family loyalty and how I was sabotaging Tyler's dreams. Mom accused me of being bitter and selfish, of trying to keep Tyler down because I couldn't handle seeing him succeed. Tyler himself just sat there looking wounded, like I had personally destroyed his entire future. I listened to it all without saying a word. Then I stood up, put my plate in the sink, and went to my room. That night, I lay in bed listening to them talk downstairs, their voices rising and falling, but always coming back to the same theme. What a disappointment I was. How selfish and unsupportive, how I was holding the whole family back. For the first time in years, I seriously considered moving out. I had thought about it before, but always dismissed the idea because I knew they couldn't manage without me. Now I wondered if maybe it was time to let them figure that out for themselves. The next morning, Dad was waiting for me in the kitchen when I came down for coffee before work. His face was grim, and I could tell he'd been up most of the night. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm going to be late for work." "This is more important than work." He sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for me to do the same. "Marcus, I'm going to be straight with you. Your mother and I are disappointed. Very disappointed." I poured my coffee and leaned against the counter, waiting. "Tyler has a chance here, a real chance to make something of himself, and you're standing in his way." "I'm not standing in his way. I'm just not funding his dreams." Dad's jaw tightened. "You know what I think? I think you like being the provider. I think you like feeling superior to the rest of us. Tyler's success threatens that, doesn't it?" I felt anger flare in my chest, hot and immediate. "Superior? You think I feel superior? Dad, I work 70 hours a week to keep this family afloat while you sit in that chair watching TV. Tyler hasn't worked a day in 3 years, and you treat him like some kind of visionary entrepreneur. And I'm the one with the superiority complex? Don't you dare speak to me that way. Why not? What are you going to do, kick me out? Go ahead. See how long this house stays afloat without my income." Dad stood up so fast his chair fell over. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me. Instead, he pointed his finger at my face, his hand shaking with rage. "You are not the man I raised. The Marcus I raised would support his family. The Marcus I raised would want to see his brother succeed." "The Marcus you raised was a pushover," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "But that Marcus is gone." I grabbed my work bag and headed for the door, leaving Dad standing in the kitchen. As I drove to work, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up to my father. I had refused to be guilted into doing something I didn't believe in. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. The Cold War continued for another week. Mom and Dad barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was with the kind of icy politeness usually reserved for strangers. Tyler avoided me entirely, which was actually a relief. Then, on a Friday evening, everything changed. I came home from work to find Dad sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of him. His face was flushed with excitement, and he looked up when I walked in with something approaching triumph. "Well, Marcus," he said, his voice smug, "looks like we don't need your help after all." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I found another way to get the money for Tyler's business, $15,000, cash in hand." Before I could ask how, Tyler burst through the front door, practically bouncing with excitement. "Did you tell him yet?" Tyler asked Dad, his grin stretching ear to ear. "Tell me what?" Dad leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying this moment. "I found your little nest egg, son." My blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" "The money you had hidden in your closet. $15,000, cash. Don't worry, I put it to good use." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling down. "You went through my things?" "I was looking for something, and I happened to find that shoebox full of cash. Amazing how much money you can save when you're not contributing to your family." "Dad," I could barely speak. "That money wasn't mine." He laughed. A harsh sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, come on. Whose else would it be?" You expect me to believe you were just holding someone else's $15,000 in cash? Before I could answer, Tyler jumped in. The important thing is I can buy the truck now. I'm meeting the seller tomorrow morning. This is really happening. I sank into the chair, my legs too weak to hold me up. The money they had stolen, and it was stealing, no matter how they tried to justify it, belonged to my Uncle James, my mother's brother. He had given it to me 2 months ago when he was going through his messy divorce, asking me to hold it until the legal proceedings were finished. It was money he needed to start over, to get his own apartment, to rebuild his life. Uncle James had trusted me with his future, and my father had stolen it to fund Tyler's fantasy. You have to give it back, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Give it back? Dad's voice rose with indignation. I'm not giving anything back. That money is going to help your brother build his future. It's not my money to give. Then whose is it? Mom asked, appearing in the doorway. She must have heard the commotion from upstairs. I looked at the three of them, my parents and brother, the people who were supposed to love and support me, and realized there was no point in lying anymore. It belongs to Uncle James. The room went completely silent. Mom's face went pale, and even Tyler stopped grinning. James? Mom repeated. My brother James? He gave it to me when he started his divorce proceedings. He asked me to keep it safe until everything was settled. He's supposed to pick it up this weekend. Dad's face went through several color changes, red to pale to red again. But instead of apologizing, instead of showing any remorse, he doubled down. Well, he should have told us he was using you as his personal bank. How were we supposed to know? You weren't supposed to go through my things, I shouted, finally losing control. You weren't supposed to steal from me. I didn't steal anything, Dad shot back. I found money in my house and used it to help my son. If James has a problem with that, he can take it up with me. At that moment, as if summoned by the mention of his name, the front door opened and Uncle James walked in. He had his own key, had always been welcome in our house growing up. He was smiling, carrying a bottle of wine, probably planning to stay for dinner like he often did on Friday nights. Hey everybody, he said cheerfully. Hope I'm not interrupting anything. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the next room. Uncle James looked around at our faces. Dad's guilty expression, Mom's pale shock, Tyler's wide-eyed panic, my own barely contained fury, and his smile slowly faded. What's going on? He asked. I looked at my father, giving him a chance to explain, to take responsibility, to do the right thing. But Dad just stood there like a deer in headlights. Uncle James, I said, my voice cracking, I'm so sorry, the money you gave me to hold, Dad took it. Uncle James blinked slowly, like he was having trouble processing the words. Took it? What do you mean, took it? Dad finally found his voice. James, I can explain. I found this money in Marcus's room, and I thought it was his savings. I used it to help Tyler start his business. If I had known it was yours. You used my $15,000 for what? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Uncle James's voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made everyone take a step back. Tyler, in a moment of staggering stupidity, chose that moment to speak up. I bought a food truck. I'm starting a business with gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches. It's going to be amazing. Uncle James turned to look at Tyler with an expression I had never seen before. It was the look of a man who had just discovered that his trust had been betrayed in the most casual, thoughtless way possible. You spent my money on a food truck. It wasn't a question. James, Mom said, stepping forward, we had no idea Marcus was holding money for you. This is all just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Uncle James's voice was getting louder. Susan, I specifically told Marcus not to tell anyone about the money because I was worried about my ex-wife trying to claim it in the divorce. I trusted him to keep it safe, and your husband stole it. I didn't steal anything, Dad protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Uncle James pulled out his phone. Tyler, did you already pay for this truck? Tyler nodded, suddenly looking much younger than his 24 years. Then you better figure out how to unbuy it, because I need that money back by Monday morning. Monday morning? Tyler's voice cracked. But the guy already signed over the title. I can't just return it like a shirt. Uncle James turned to Dad. David, I need my $15,000 back. That money is all I have to start over after my divorce. Without it, I'm homeless. Dad spread his hands helplessly. James, I don't have $15,000. The money's already spent. Then get it back. I can't just get it back, Uncle James roared, his face turning red. I don't care how you do it. Sell the truck, take out a loan, rob a bank for all I care. But I want my money back by Monday, or I'm calling the police. The word police hit the room like a bomb. Mom gasped. Tyler went white as a sheet. Dad started stammering about how they were family and how calling the police was unnecessary. But Uncle James was already heading for the door. He paused with his hand on the handle and looked back at me. Marcus, I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. This isn't your fault. Then he looked at the rest of my family. You have until Monday. After that, I'm pressing charges for theft. The door slammed behind him, leaving us in stunned silence. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Tyler started crying, actual tears running down his face. "What am I going to do?" he wailed. "I can't give the truck back. The guy said all sales were final." Dad was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "There has to be something we can do. Some way to work this out." Mom sat down heavily in a chair, looking older than I had ever seen her. "Oh God, David, what have you done?" And that's when Dad turned to me with the most audacious request I had ever heard in my life. "Marcus, you have to help us. You have to talk to James. Convince him not to go to the police." I stared at my father in complete disbelief. "Are you insane?" "Your family," he said desperately. "You can't let them arrest your own father. You stole $15,000. I made a mistake. People make mistakes." I stood up slowly, feeling like I was moving through water. Everything seemed surreal, like this was happening to someone else. "A mistake?" I repeated. "Dad, you went through my personal belongings, found money that didn't belong to you, and spent it without asking a single question. That's not a mistake. That's theft." Tyler was still crying. "Marcus, please, I'll lose everything. The truck, the business, everything." I looked at my younger brother, this man-child who had never worked for anything in his life, who had just had his dreams handed to him with stolen money, and felt something inside me finally break. "Tyler," I said quietly, "you never had anything to lose. You never worked for the truck. You never saved for the business. You never did anything except ask other people to pay for your dreams." I turned to my parents. "And you two enabled him. You spent your entire lives teaching him that he deserves everything without earning anything. And now you're surprised that it led to this?" Dad's face was getting red again. "Don't you dare lecture us about parenting. We did the best we could." "Your best?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your best was sitting back and watching me work myself to death while you treated Tyler like a prince. Your best was stealing from your own son to fund a fantasy. Your best was betraying the trust of someone who loved you." I started walking toward the stairs, but Dad grabbed my arm. "Where are you going? We need to figure this out." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. "Let go of me." "Marcus, you can't just walk away from this. We're family? Family?" I repeated. "Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't expect one person to carry all the weight while everyone else coasts. Family doesn't blame the victim when their theft is discovered." I pulled my arm free and headed upstairs. Behind me, I could hear Dad shouting about loyalty and responsibility, Mom crying, and Tyler still wailing about his lost business. I went to my room and closed the door. For the first time in hours, it was quiet. I sat on my bed and tried to process what had just happened. In the space of 30 minutes, my entire family had imploded. My father was facing potential criminal charges. My uncle probably hated all of us, and somehow, some way, it was still going to end up being my fault. I pulled out my phone and called Uncle James. "Marcus?" He answered on the first ring. "Uncle James, I am so sorry. I should have hidden the money better. I should have." "Stop," he said firmly. "This is not your fault. I trusted you to keep my money safe, and you did. It's not your job to protect it from thieves, even if they're your own family." "What are you going to do?" There was a long pause. "I meant what I said. If I don't have my money by Monday, I'm calling the police. I can't afford to be understanding about this, Marcus. That money is literally all I have." "I know. I understand. Do you think they'll be able to get it back?" I thought about Tyler's food truck, about Dad's complete lack of savings, about Mom's shopping habits, and the mountain of debt our family was already carrying. "I don't think so," I said honestly. Uncle James sighed. "Then I guess we'll see what happens on Monday." After we hung up, I sat in my room listening to the chaos downstairs. They were arguing now. Dad and Tyler shouting at each other, Mom crying and trying to mediate. I could hear words like lawsuit and prison and ruined floating up through the floorboards. Around midnight, the house finally went quiet. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing that everything had changed and there was no going back. Saturday and Sunday were like living in a war zone. Dad spent the weekend frantically calling everyone he knew, trying to borrow $15,000. Nobody had that kind of money to lend, especially not to someone with no collateral and no steady income. Tyler tried to return the food truck, but just as he'd said, the sale was final. The seller had already moved the money and had no interest in taking back a truck he'd already sold. Mom alternated between rage and despair, sometimes blaming Dad for his stupidity, sometimes blaming me for not preventing this somehow, sometimes blaming Uncle James for being unreasonable about wanting his own money back. Through it all, they kept coming to me. Over and over, they asked me to talk to Uncle James, to convince him to be patient, to work out some kind of payment plan. They wanted me to fix what they had broken, to save them from the consequences of their own actions. I refused every time. Monday morning arrived gray and rainy, matching the mood in our house. Dad was a wreck, unshaven, still in yesterday's clothes, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Tyler sat at the kitchen table, staring at his hands, finally understanding that his food truck dream was about to become his family's nightmare. At exactly 9 a.m., Uncle James called. Mom answered the phone with shaking hands. "Hello, James." I could hear his voice through the speaker, calm and professional. "Susan, do you have my money?" "James, please, we just need a little more time." "Do you have my money?" Silence. "Then I'm calling the police. Goodbye, Susan." The line went dead. Mom dropped the phone like it had burned her. Tyler started crying again. Dad just sat there looking defeated. "This is your fault," Dad said suddenly, looking at me. "If you had just helped us in the beginning, none of this would have happened." Even after everything, after the theft, after the lies, after the complete destruction of our family, he was still trying to blame me. I stood up from the table and walked to the stairs. "Where are you going?" Mom asked. "To pack." "Pack? Pack for what?" I turned back to look at all three of them. My parents and brother arrived, the people who had shaped my entire adult life around their needs and wants and dreams. "I'm moving out. Today." "You can't leave," Dad said desperately. "Not now. We need you." "You should have thought about that before you stole from me." "Marcus, please," Mom begged. "We're family. Families stick together." I looked at my mother, this woman who had raised me, who had told me bedtime stories and packed my school lunches and taught me to tie my shoes. This woman who had spent the last 3 days trying to convince me that Uncle James was being unreasonable for wanting his stolen money back. "Family," I repeated. "You know what, Mom? You're right. Families do stick together. They support each other. They make sacrifices for each other. They trust each other." I gestured around the room. "But this isn't a family. This is me working myself to death while the three of you take everything I have and then blame me when it's not enough." Tyler looked up with tears streaming down his face. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry." Sorry doesn't give Uncle James his money back. Sorry doesn't undo what Dad did. Sorry doesn't fix any of this. I went upstairs and started packing. I didn't have much. Most of my possessions were work clothes and a few personal items. Everything valuable in the house had been paid for with my money, but purchased in their names. I was leaving behind thousands of dollars worth of furniture, electronics, and household items. But I didn't care. I just wanted out. When I came back downstairs with my bags, the police were already there. 2 officers stood in our living room, their presence making the space feel smaller and more sordid. Dad was talking rapidly, his hands gesturing wildly, clearly trying to explain why this was all a misunderstanding. One of the officers looked bored. The other was taking notes. "Are you Marcus?" the note-taking officer asked when he saw me. "Yes, sir." "Your uncle mentioned that you were the one holding the money that was taken. Can you confirm that?" I looked at Dad, who was staring at me with desperation in his eyes. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old Marcus, the Marcus who always tried to protect his family, who always put their needs first, who always found a way to fix their problems. Then I remembered Uncle James's voice when he talked about being homeless. I remembered Tyler's casual attitude about spending someone else's dreams. I remembered Dad's complete lack of remorse even after he'd been caught. "Yes," I said. "My uncle gave me $15,000 to hold for him during his divorce proceedings. I hid it in my bedroom closet. My father took it without permission and gave it to my brother to buy a food truck." Dad's face crumpled. Tyler let out a sob. Mom sank into a chair like all the strength had gone out of her legs. The officer nodded and continued taking notes. "Did your father know the money belonged to someone else?" I could have lied. I could have said that Dad thought it was my money, that it was all an innocent mistake. It would have been the family thing to do. But I was done being the family fixer. "I told him it wasn't my money," I said. He didn't care. 20 minutes later, Dad was in handcuffs. Tyler was sobbing uncontrollably. Mom was begging the officers to reconsider, explaining that David was a good man who had just made a terrible mistake. But the officers weren't interested in family drama. They had a clear case of theft. $15,000 taken without permission, spent despite knowing it belonged to someone else. Dad's intentions didn't matter. Tyler's dreams didn't matter. The law was the law. As they led Dad to the patrol car, he looked back at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just a broken understanding of what he had lost. Not just his freedom, but his family, his home, everything he had taken for granted. "Take care of your mother," he said quietly. I didn't respond. I couldn't promise something I had no intention of doing. After the police left, the house felt like a tomb. Mom sat in Dad's recliner, staring at nothing, tears streaming down her face. Tyler had locked himself in his room, probably trying to figure out how to explain to everyone that his big business venture had landed his father in jail. I picked up my bags and headed for the door. "Marcus, wait," Mom called out, her voice broken. "You can't leave us like this. We need you now more than ever." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. For 27 years, those words would have been enough. The guilt, the obligation, the ingrained belief that my needs came last. It would have all kicked in, and I would have stayed. But something fundamental had changed in me over the past few days. Maybe it was watching Dad blame everyone but himself for his actions. Maybe it was seeing Tyler cry about losing something he'd never earned. Maybe it was realizing that no matter how much I sacrificed, it would never be enough for them. "Mom," I said without turning around, "for 6 years I've carried this family. I've worked myself into the ground paying your bills, funding your lifestyle, enabling Tyler's refusal to grow up. And the thanks I got was having my trust violated and my belongings stolen. But we're family. No, I said firmly. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't expect one person to sacrifice everything while everyone else takes and takes and takes. Family doesn't blame the victim when their crimes are discovered. I opened the door and stepped outside. The cool morning air felt like freedom. You'll be back, Mom called after me, her voice taking on a desperate edge. You can't survive without us. We're all you have. I turned around one last time to look at the house where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to put everyone else's needs before my own, where I'd slowly lost myself in the service of people who saw my love as an unlimited resource to exploit. No, Mom, I said. You're wrong. You can't survive without me. And I walked away. I found a small one-bedroom apartment across town that same day. It wasn't much. A tiny kitchen, a living room barely big enough for a couch, a bedroom that could fit a bed and nothing else. But it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, I was living in a space that belonged only to me. The first few weeks were harder than I'd expected, but not in the way I'd thought they would be. Financially, I was actually better off. Without having to support 3 other adults, my paychecks went further than they ever had before. I could afford groceries without calculating whether we'd have enough for utilities. I could buy clothes without worrying about whether Mom needed money for her medications. The hard part was the guilt. Even after everything that had happened, even knowing that I'd made the right choice, I still felt guilty for leaving them to deal with the consequences of their actions. Dad was facing potential jail time. Tyler's food truck business was dead before it started. Mom was alone in a house she couldn't afford, with bills she couldn't pay. But every time I felt myself weakening, every time I considered going back to help them one more time, I remembered Dad going through my personal belongings like a burglar. I remembered Tyler's casual assumption that his dreams were more important than Uncle James's future. I remembered Mom trying to convince me that the victim of theft was being unreasonable for wanting his money back. 3 weeks after I moved out, Uncle James called me. How are you holding up? He asked. I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. How's the legal situation? Your father pled guilty. He got 6 months in county jail and 5 years probation. He'll also have to pay restitution, though I'm not holding my breath on that. And the money? Uncle James sighed. Gone. The food truck is in Tyler's name and he's already talking about selling it, but he'll be lucky to get half of what he paid for it. I'll probably see a few thousand back if I'm lucky. I'm so sorry, Uncle James. If I had known Dad would... Stop, he said firmly. This is not your fault, Val. You did exactly what I asked you to do. The fact that your father is a thief doesn't reflect on you. What are you going to do? Start over, I guess. I found a small apartment, got a job at a hardware store. It's not the life I planned, but it's a life. That's more than I thought I'd have a few weeks ago. After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment and thought about the cost of Tyler's dream. Dad was in jail. Uncle James had lost his chance to start fresh after his divorce. Our family was destroyed. And for what? A food truck that Tyler would probably abandon within 6 months anyway. A month later, I was proved right. I ran into an old neighbor at the grocery store, and she filled me in on all the family drama I'd missed. Tyler had tried to run the food truck for exactly 3 weeks before deciding it was too much work and not as fun as he'd thought it would be. He'd sold it at a significant loss and used the money to move in with a friend. Mom had lost the house. Without my income, she couldn't afford the mortgage payments. She was now living with her sister in another state. Such a shame, the neighbor said, shaking her head. Your family seemed so close. I nodded and made appropriate sad sounds, but inside I felt nothing but relief. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. For once in my life, I wasn't cleaning up their mess. 6 months after I'd moved out, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Marcus? It's me. Tyler's voice was smaller than I remembered, lacking the confident enthusiasm that had characterized his food truck pitch. Hi, Tyler. I wanted to call and apologize for everything. I know it's probably too late, but I needed you to know that I understand now. What I did, what Dad did, it was wrong. What made you realize that? Living on my own, I guess. Having to pay rent and buy groceries and actually work for money. I got a job at a restaurant, just washing dishes, but it's honest work. And I keep thinking about how you did this for years, supporting all of us, and we never even thanked you. I felt a flicker of something. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. I'm glad you're working, Tyler. I'm glad you're learning to take care of yourself. I sold the truck, he said quietly. I only got back about $8,000. I gave it all to Uncle James. I know it's not even close to what Dad stole, but it was all I had. That surprised me. It was the first genuinely selfless thing I'd ever known Tyler to do. That was the right thing to do. Marcus, do you think we could maybe get coffee sometime? I know I don't deserve it, but I miss having a brother. I looked around my small apartment, at the life I'd built for myself, at the peace I'd found in putting my own needs first for once. Tyler's call didn't threaten that. He wasn't asking me to come back and fix everything. He wasn't asking for money or support or solutions to his problems. He was just asking for a chance to rebuild something that had been broken. Yeah, I said. I think I'd like that. We met the following Saturday at a coffee shop downtown. Tyler looked different. Thinner, more serious, with calluses on his hands from his dishwashing job. When he apologized again, I could see that he meant it. When he talked about his work, there was a new pride in his voice that had nothing to do with grandiose dreams and everything to do with earning an honest paycheck. We didn't talk about dad or mom or the money. We just talked about our lives as they were now. Two brothers trying to figure out how to be adults, how to rebuild something that had been destroyed by selfishness and entitlement and the toxic belief that family meant never having to face consequences. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. As I drove home from that coffee meeting, I thought about the Marcus I used to be. The exhausted, resentful man who worked 2 jobs to support people who took his sacrifice for granted. That Marcus was gone, replaced by someone who understood that loving your family didn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. I thought about Dad, serving his sentence, and hopefully learning that actions have consequences. I thought about Mom, living with her sister, and probably complaining to anyone who would listen about her ungrateful son who had abandoned the family in their hour of need. I thought about Uncle James, starting over in his 60s because someone he trusted had betrayed him. And I thought about Tyler, washing dishes and learning for the first time in his life what it meant to work for something. Maybe we could rebuild. Maybe we could find a way to be a family again, but a healthier one, where everyone contributed and no one expected others to carry their weight. Maybe Tyler's fall from grace was exactly what he needed to become the man he should have been all along. Or maybe not. Maybe some damage was too deep to repair, some trust too broken to rebuild. But for the first time in my adult life, that wasn't my problem to solve. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. That sometimes protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That sometimes the only way to save a drowning person is to stop letting them drag you down with them. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex and sat in my car for a moment, looking up at the windows of my small home. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had earned it through my own work, paid for it with my own money, furnished it according to my own taste. For the first time in my life, I was free. I got out of the car and walked toward my front door, leaving the past where it belonged, behind me. Subscribe for more daily stories.